Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice. This is Donovan. And today we are going to talk about how to navigate through major life decisions with a significant other and what that looks like, because obviously people have different opinions and thoughts about, kids or marriage or where we should live, those kind of major life decisions. And we don't always agree on those kinds of things. So Donovan, what are your thoughts on, where a couple should start when they're trying to navigate through a major life decision?
Yeah, I want to start right out of the gate by saying this is particularly something that's been difficult for me. So I don't have all the perfect answers or best strategies or whatnot. And it's definitely been something that, sometimes I do a pretty good job of, and other times things aren't resolved quite as well as they should be. But that being said, it's going to sound very cliche, but the core of it is communication, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that both people have their beliefs or their desires or goals or whatever else out on the table. And, you might not get this like right out the gate in the first date or second date or whatever else, but throughout the course of the relationship, like these things really need to be looked at, because what can happen if you don't start navigating these is there are assumptions built in on both sides, such as, oh, at this point, we're going to buy a house. This point, we're going to get married. This point, X, Y, Z. And if both people aren't aligned on that, then you can start having some really serious and painful problems. You can also run into the problem of like these sort of hanging aspirations or goals where one person doesn't quite feel fulfilled and doesn't see the path to getting to something that's very important to them. And then, it just builds resentment or builds whatever negative feelings. And then that again can cause problems. So as usual, like the core foundation is communication. Now, once you get beyond that, the part that gets really tricky is a lot of times there are problems or differences or paths that do not align at all. And trying to find a way to make it work or decide that it's not going to work, that's when things get super, super hard.
Right.
I'm not going to just ramble about that. I want to hear what you have in your mind first before I start. But yeah, that's the tough part, I think.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult, and it's something I'm personally dealing with myself, in that, love doesn't conquer all sometimes. And it's really heartbreaking when you love someone so much when it doesn't align up perfectly. And this is something I'm like struggling with in my own relationship, in that, I've always wanted to have kids, and he does too, but there's fear, and he wants like more stability first before that happens. And we actually started working with some relationship coaches to help us navigate through that, which has been super beneficial, I beyond believe, because we thought like this year we were playing the same game, and that we both were playing for kids. Like, was my priority was like, I want to have kids by a certain timeline. I only have so much time. And yeah, I mean, ideally I would like to be more stable in my career, business, and finances. And I'm not exactly where I'd like to be comfortable to start a family, but I know I have that trust and faith that I can get there, and that I will, do what it takes to rise to the occasion. And so that was the case. So like, regardless of my financial situation, I'm still committed to having a kid. Is kind of like, kid first, I'll figure out the finances, second priority. And then what we uncovered in our coaching session was that for him, it was like stability first, then kids. So it was like reversed in his mind. And I get it, but we were just playing different games. We weren't on the same page. And I was like, we can't wait indefinitely for us to both hit a certain income bracket or marker before we can start, because that, maybe that could be like a year out, 5 years out. I don't know. And that's not something I'm willing to risk, like my window biological clock that I have to have a child. So it was that struggle, and we are realizing that we need to play on the same game. So it's like a matter of one of us surrendering and, you know, compromising, and, you know, it's difficult to navigating, and it's heartbreaking because there's so much love there. And I really think it does come down to communication, and so critical to be super clear. And we thought we were being like, we're pretty good with communication with like timelines, but we didn't really break down the steps of like what would it take for us to like get to our milestones and our goals to get where we could be aligned at the same time. And, you know, life happened, the whole pandemic threw a monkey wrench into things too, but it's still, you know, we're kind of getting at that crossroads of realizing that, you know, we didn't map out the plan as dialed in as we could have, and we wish we started this like a year ago versus like scrambling trying to do it last minute, and it feels stressful and high pressure for us. But ultimately I think it's just super important to express early on in the relationship. Yeah, maybe not right, or maybe on the first date might scare him away, but if it scares him away, then, you know, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's someone you don't want to be with. I mean, I'm not saying like propose to someone and talk about kids on the first date, but, you know, maybe after a few dates, it's not about like, I want to marry you, I want to have kids with you right now, I just met you. It's not that. It's like, you know, this is what I envision for myself in my life and what I want. And, you know, I'm looking for a partner who wants that same vision as me. I'm not sure if that is you, as we got to get to know each other. But if that's not aligned and he's like unsure, then, you know, maybe that's someone you can always find love. You have to find love within yourself first and foremost. But it's like, you can't always find someone that's perfectly aligned with your vision, or if they're really like not aligned at all, they're not sure or they don't want it. It's like you can't expect people to change. I think that's something people have to get up of, like hoping he'll come around. Ladies, that does not always happen. Do not wait for him to come around. If you really want something, if you're committed to something, you got to go for it, and you got to stand for what you're wanting out of life. And this goes for men too, same thing. But like kind of the dynamic I tend to see is like women tending to want kids more, having that maternal urge, and men not always having that urge to do it. So it's just kind of like that struggle sometimes. So I know that was a whole lot, perhaps rambling, but what are your thoughts about that from the male perspective, I guess?
Yeah, I think, you know, while the details may differ a little bit generically, I think for the most part it doesn't matter which gender you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rules or the ideas or the processes all kind of boil down to the same thing. And I
Yeah.
think you highlighted a couple things that are interesting and important to note. So the first thing is that getting an outside perspective, or getting some outside help, or getting some, you know, someone else in the mix to kind of help like weigh out the different pieces and figure things out, like you were talking about with some coaching. I think that's a really, really valuable resource, because especially with big decisions in, you know, romantic relationships, you end up so intertwined with your values and goals and beliefs and feelings, and you want this to keep this other person, but you also want to keep all the pieces of the things that you want. And it can just be a little bit easier to get those pieces pulled apart and more clear with someone else, obviously, especially if they have training in like navigating through relationships. So I wanted to highlight that piece. Another piece that stood out to me was kind of this idea of like, you kind of have to find the balance between the relationship that you built and what you want out of life. And kind of when you were talking about your situation, you know, the priorities were flip-flopped between the top two things. And at that point, the decisions are really, you know, one of three things. One is one person or the other person. I guess this is two of the decisions. Just like sacrifice some amount of their priorities and just accept that as part of the relationship. And the other real decision is basically to walk some other path, right? Split up and find something separate. And it's really tough because a lot of times those are the decisions. And you can try to look for some other things and see like, oh, maybe there's a middle ground, maybe there's a place we can find it. But a
Mhm.
lot of times these big decisions come down to value priority differences, which are not something that shake very easily. So it gets pretty tough to just like figure out, okay, what is the value of this relationship in my life relative to the other things I want to accomplish? And
Mhm.
me saying it now sounds nice and pretty and cold and calculating and no emotion whatsoever. And you can just figure out the math and make the choice. But
Mhm.
obviously, once you actually have to do it, then all the history and the experiences and
Yeah.
everything else comes in and makes it much, much more difficult.
Mhm.
So I don't know if anything I'm saying is actually useful. Besides that, it's just a really tough problem. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get is there's no quick and easy solution. There's no, oh, do you just, you follow this and you're done.
Mhm.
Um, I do think, at least speaking for myself, historically, I've overinvested in kind of this one one shot kind of idea. Like this is the person, and I need to make it work, and I have to figure it out because we've built something here, and I'm not going to be able to build something else. And it's not explicit; those aren't explicit thoughts, but it's kind of this implicit feeling of just like, well, I've already built this relationship, so oh, I can just figure out a way to kind of like squirrel through whatever problems we have and make it work.
Right.
But going back a couple steps, that's not always the case. There
Mhm.
are definitely times and relationships I've had where it's just a value difference and it is painful, but you have to basically move forward because there's no way to resolve it. So one example for me is I was dating someone who was very religious and
Mhm.
wanted to date someone who was also of the same religion, which I'm not. And I
Mhm.
spent so long and so much energy just trying to make that work and figure it out and flip
Mhm.
things around. And maybe what if we do this? And what if we do this thing? But at the top of that values hierarchy was like religion and not religion, and those don't connect.
Mhm.
And that's a pretty easy example, although at the time it was impossible for me to see.
Yeah.
But the same thing, like you were saying, like it's not just this feeling, it's not just this care, it's not this like just love that alone makes things
Mhm.
work. Now it's super awesome and nice, and it really sucks when you have to not hold
Yeah.
on to that,
Right.
but it doesn't always work out. Now that being said, I do think there is also a lot of space to negotiate, to try to
Mhm.
work through things. One of the other things I wanted to highlight out of what you were saying is getting into the details, because I actually think it's pretty natural to get some idea of
Mhm.
what people want to aspire and do as a relationship develops.
Mhm.
But I don't know if it always happens naturally that you get into the really specific details if the person has one, right? So, like, for example, if you have had a specific timeline for a long time, a year or a date or whatever else that you wanted to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Now, it sounds like that probably came up for you, but for a lot of relationships, I don't think it does, right? Like, I think it comes up as this nebulous, like, oh, I want to have kids. Oh, I want to have kids. And then you find out that one person is in the next 2 years and the other person is in the next 20 years.
Mhm.
And those timelines don't match up. So I think, if I have a practical thing to say, it's about as you delve into some of those aspirations and as the relationship develops and those things get unpacked,
Mhm.
dialing in where possible on the specifics. Maybe
Mhm.
it doesn't happen. Like maybe they don't have it. Like me personally, I would like to have my own business. It doesn't have a timeline attached to it
Yeah.
for when that should be my full time thing. So that's like a pretty nebulous one. But I know there are many, many other goals and aspirations that are very tightly drawn to timelines, and having that and being able to communicate around that is really, really valuable and avoids some of the stuff like you were saying, where it's like, oh, I kind of have this in my head. Oh, it's been a long time. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think I'm moving towards this. This is not good. All right,
Right.
that's plenty of words for me.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think a really good point you made was to not feel like this person, if I can't make it work with this person, then I can't make it work with anyone, or the idea of, I won't, nobody's gonna love me like this person. So I gotta like shove this circle peg into the square hole and it just doesn't fit, and you can and try and it's just not working, and it just doesn't, it's not going to be a fit. And I get like maybe there isn't always like a perfect fit, but there's like major values are super critical to establish right up front to get clear before you invest more time. But if you're already in a relationship for a while and you feel like, you know, those values aren't being aligned and they're not moving in that direction, then it's a really, you know, it's tough. It's heartbreaking to know that, you know, maybe this isn't going to work out, but it doesn't mean it's not going to work out with anyone. And that, yeah, it sucks because you have built something beautiful and loving, and you know, you might have to start over. But that's life sometimes. But you have to realize, you know, you either give up what you want, but you have to realize if you do that, are you going to be resentful if you do that or not? If you are, then it's not worthwhile staying in the relationship with resentment. Or, you know, give break it. It's just like how it goes, you know, relationships end, and it's okay, it's sad. You don't have to make like every single relationship doesn't always pan out, and it's okay. And I think there's a lot of guilt and shame when you aren't able to make that relationship or marriage. You know, look at the divorce rate. I know there's a lot of shame about getting divorced. And, you know, nobody goes into a marriage typically being like, yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to get divorced, or I hope this, I don't think this is going to work out, but let's just try it. Anyways, it's like everyone has these hopes and dreams for these relationships to work out. And the reality is that they don't always do that. And sometimes that's for the best, because you grow from that. You learn more about yourself, more about what you want. Hopefully for the next relationship, you communicate clearly from the get-go like what it is that you want, instead of trying to like be that person you think that person wants. You just be yourself and speak to that.
And I think that brings up another point that I've experienced firsthand and see a lot, which is getting wrapped up in your personal value with the relationship, right? I've seen, and I've done it a lot of times, like that relationship I was talking about before. I kept thinking, you know, when it wasn't working, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get this to work?
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about it in terms of, you know, like a puzzle, and like, do these two pieces fit together?
Mm-hmm.
No, that doesn't mean the puzzle pieces are broken. It just means these two pieces aren't the ones that go together.
Right.
I was thinking about a lot in terms of just like, oh man, if there's something wrong with me. So I guess it goes back to something you said towards the beginning, which is figuring out kind of your own path and your own self-love and your own care about yourself first. And we talked about this in another video too. That's when you bring the best of yourself to a relationship. But it's also important for navigating relationships, because I think when that piece is weak, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you are defined by the relationship, or that it has some large bearing on your value as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to kind of disambiguate those things helps a lot for making a decision that's going to serve you into the future. Because, you know, like I mentioned, there are definitely times where maybe it is worth it to you to give up something that's not as important to maintain a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But there are going to be times when there's just fundamental differences that can't be worked out, and being able to see that, again, it's not, you know, this is something broken,
Mm-hmm.
but this is not the right fit.
Right.
Helps a lot, because when I was thinking about it in terms of brokenness, that was so painful, and it kept me in relationships that I should not have been in.
Mm-hmm.
And more recently, being able to think about it in terms of like, does it make sense for us to walk this path together? Are we both on the same, in the same direction, doing things that we both want? If not, I will value the piece of, you know, my journey that we took together and let it be what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That new framing has allowed me to make, I think, better decisions both for myself and for the people that I've happened to run into.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so important to really distinguish that, you know, if it doesn't work, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. And I had that same, I think, mentality when I was in my 20s, and I went through like a series of short-term relationships. And it was kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, what's wrong with me? What am I doing right? And then, or what am I doing wrong? And then trying to like work harder to like hold on to something that wasn't working. And that was just more painful. And then it wouldn't work out. And then I was like heartbroken. And then it was just like a rinse and repeat cycle. And I really had to do some like deep diving into uncovering, you know, the lack of self-love that I had, and work on loving myself first and foremost, feeling like whole and complete, that I'm worthy of love, to actually be in a place to invite like a healthy, loving relationship into my life. And one thing I'm curious about would be, for anyone, what are your thoughts about like people who they don't even know what their values are? They don't even know what they want. They're uncertain. They're just blank. I know a lot of guys are just like, I don't even know. I'm unsure. I don't know if I'm not a no, I'm not a yes. I'm just kind of in this like questionable state. Like, what would you suggest for these people to get clarity with figuring out their values in life?
Yeah, I had a similar-ish experience with someone who I've done a decent amount of work around my values,
Mm-hmm.
and I was trying to explore with this person what their values were.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, well, let me see what yours are so that I can get an example. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Like these are some of my values and
Yeah.
kind of their relative order.
Mm-hmm.
And their response was, oh, cool. These are my values too. Yep, I value those things.
Yeah.
And so
Uh-huh.
over time, as I got to know that person better, I realized that those weren't really their values, right? That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really the things they valued most.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I bring that up is because this idea of developing your values can get stuck in a very superficial place, which
Mhm.
is, oh, these 5 things all sound like good attributes, and these are things that I like. So sure, these are
Sure.
my values.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a pretty common thing
Right.
for people who are kind of just first looking at their values and trying to think about them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the solution to that, or the way to get a little bit deeper, is to, or at least one solution, is to end up with a list of values. And a lot of the like little tests or whatever you'll take does this for you, but ranking them relative to each other, right? They're all going to be things that are like, oh, this is nice, this is valuable. But when
Mm-hmm.
you start thinking about it in terms of, would I rather have, stability, or a large family, or a family, which of these 2 things is more important to me? When you start thinking about it in terms of which of these things is more important, it can help you sort through which values actually resonate. So
Yeah.
I don't know any off the top of my head. There are definitely quizzes out there. There are like lists you can look at. You can just do it yourself and kind of like ask questions between those 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that really helps you pinpoint, when you take the top 5 or whatever after you've done an exercise like that, then you can really see which values speak to you most strongly. Because if you just do it off the top of your head, or you just do it by like, oh, do you value honor? Well, yes, of course I value honor. Do you value honesty? Yes, I value honor. You're not going to say, oh, I don't value kindness. Like, I just want to be a terrible person and be rude to people and hurt their feelings.
Right.
So, and I mean, I guess if somebody like goes that hard against one of those values, then maybe that's a red flag in and of itself. But for the most part, you have to have something to compare it against. And I hear the example like with companies, right? Like there's a lot of companies that have just like excellence and teamwork, and it's like, what does that mean? Like, compared to what? What are you comparing those things against? Like excellence or bad products? Like, okay.
Right. Of course, I'll choose the excellence over that.
So
Yeah.
I think the at least one piece of that navigation of finding your values is tapping into it a little bit more deeply and kind of pairing them off against each other to see which ones really resonate with you most strongly. I think another way to kind of dig them out at a more realistic level is to look at the kinds of actions you're taking. You may not be aligned with your core values, but a lot of the times you are acting in whatever values you have, whether they're implicit or explicit. And by that, I mean, you might say, oh, I value health, and then look at your health behaviors and you don't have any.
Right.
And realize that like you may want to value that, but right now you're not doing anything. So I guess another piece of that is how are you actualizing your values? Because
Oh,
that will point out to you what is most strong in your values. Because again, if health is one of your strongest values, you
mhm,
will have actionable behaviors going along with it. And if it's a weaker value that an aspirational value, then
mhm.
you may not have those behaviors. You can develop them totally,
Yeah.
but the core question is digging out which things are most important to you.
Mhm.
And again, I think that surface level can kind of get tricky, like you were saying, where you don't really know your values, or you take a set of values that does not map onto the things you believe most strongly.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that was a really key critical thing that you mentioned about the actionable steps that you're taking towards your values, because that in itself, it's like everyone has great big hopes and dreams. Like there's like a ton of people that want to start a business, for example, but they do absolutely nothing to like make that a reality. And it's like, yeah, it's great to have a dream, but if it really matters to you, if that is something that you really want, then yeah, you have to take some steps. I don't know what that looks like, getting a business coach, getting some tutorials online, talking to business owners, whatever that takes. It's like those are steps to move you in that direction. And I think it's really important to evaluate when, like that example of looking at a list of values potentially will give you a sense of, okay, out of these, what matters the most to me and what actions am I taking that is in alignment with me fulfilling on that commitment that I value supposedly. Yeah, I think that's super critical. And I don't think that's also something I don't know if anyone maps out as well as they could. So that's where, working with a coach or someone that can hold you to account and create like a roadmap for you to follow if it really matters for you. Maybe it does really matter and you just have no idea where to even start. And that's okay. That's because you don't, this thing that you want, it's like it sounds great and amazing and you have no idea what's going to be that pathway that gets you there. That's where you ask for help. It's like from someone who's done it, who's gotten there themselves. It's just like that's what it would take to get some guidance and direction. I think is really read books, whatever it takes. It's like you gotta take some steps and some actions, if that really matters for you. And then if you find yourself resisting that, or it's like, oh, I'm reading a book or getting a coach or got to talk to someone or research, and you're like not excited about that, then maybe you're not really, maybe that's not important to you. Maybe you shouldn't do that thing. it's like, yeah. And it's like, yeah, for me, like my businesses, it drives me, it's hard work. It's a lot of grit. It's painful sometimes. There's like dealing with rejection, dealing with like all these administrative things I don't like to do, having to post on social media. It's like all these things I don't enjoy, but I love what I do at the heart of my businesses. So and even though it's like the startup phase, it's not making me that much money. It's painful. It's like putting in a ton of hours, not getting like not like oh, you put in X amount of hours, you get X amount of income. That doesn't work with business sometimes. So it doesn't, and it's stressful. But I believe and know that my businesses make a difference in people's lives, in their health, or in their own businesses for my second business. And it drives me to keep pushing because I see the difference that I'm making for people. And that helps propel me, even though there's a lot of unpleasant, not so pretty. It's not glamorous. It's grit. It's hard work. You got to like dig in the trenches. But for me, I see it's worth it because it's in line with my values.
Yeah, and I want to pull that whole values piece back into kind of the idea of navigating through tough decisions,
Mm-hmm.
which I think it's really important. Like you were just saying, you have a very clear idea of some of the things that provide you value and make you feel fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And when you know what those values are and those actions that actually make you feel fulfilled, it's easier in one sense to navigate decisions with someone else and harder in another sense.
Mm-hmm.
So in one sense it's easier because you know what you want to do and what you don't want to do. In
Yeah.
another sense it's harder because with more clarity brings less ambiguity, which is to say that you're less likely to be like, well, I guess I could just fold on this thing and see how it turns out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily think actually one is better or worse. Like I do think it's good to get your values figured out, right? So that you don't make a bunch of decisions that you kind of wish-washy on and then later figure out, oh wow, I actually hate all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think there are varying degrees, I guess, at which people, not you, but general people may be willing to like sacrifice certain things to navigate that path. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's important, like you were saying, like the business that you're working on, you know is one of the or businesses are the things that help drive you and bring value and do
Mm-hmm.
things for you. So if you were to run into someone that says, you know, I don't for whatever reason, our setup requires that you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know pretty clearly that that's not a path you want to take.
Yeah.
So beyond just your values, I guess what I'm trying to get at, knowing the relative importance of some of your aspirations
Mm-hmm.
compared to how the relationship is going and whatnot, and what other things can fulfill you or do fulfill you. So let's say hypothetically, you also knew that there was some other path that I can't think of off the top of my head, but something other than a business
Mm-hmm.
that would leave you equally fulfilled, or that you were equally interested in, or that fulfilled your values equally as much.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that beforehand and you see conflict, you know, in a relationship and a major decision in some way,
Mm-hmm.
you can see potential options, right? It may be that like, no, this business thing, this is the thing I need to do. There's no wiggle room.
Yeah.
But it could be, hey, this is really cool and important to me, but
Mm-hmm.
like this other thing is really cool and important to me. And I don't mind between these two if it maintains the relationship. I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, I want to make sure that it doesn't come across as like, figure out your values and exactly what you want to do and don't budge. Because
Right.
it really depends on
Right.
how those things impact you relative to your relationship and the options and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I don't want to say like fold on everything and just make it work no matter what, because
Yeah.
you know, if you have these things that are
Mm-hmm.
extremely important to you and no real alternatives, then the bottom line is you don't really want to live your life differently from that. So like it's not worth it to hold on to, like we were talking earlier, some relationship that doesn't fulfill those
Mm-hmm.
parameters, because you're not going to get that back in the relationship, right? Like if the relationship isn't so good and strong and nice and such a pleasant thing in your life that it just overwhelms these other goals, which I think for a lot of people it won't. Like a lot of people have other aspirations and they need those things to work together,
Yeah.
then the option is going to be to take some alternate path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. That's a lot of words.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good example. I think in my own life situation, you know, things that are super valuable for me is, you know, having a child is important to me, but also, you know, having my businesses and living out my dream. And I realize, you know, those two might not align perfectly at the same time. And, you know, the child thing has a little bit more of a timeline. The business thing, yeah, I know, you know, if I have a child now, if I'm not making enough from my businesses, then I'm willing to, you know, do a side hustle, side gig job if that's what it takes to raise the child. And it doesn't mean I'm giving up on my dreams of, you know, having a really successful business. And I know I can get there. It might slow it down a little bit having a kid in that process, but that's okay. I'm willing to do that and pursue both. But you know, the business side has more flexibility in the timeline thing versus the kid thing. So I think that's important to evaluate. You know, some things have more of a time restriction versus other things. So factoring that in, and just because you know, the kid thing is because of the timeline, I guess it's maybe more valuable right now compared to the business, but you know, business is still valuable. I just know that I have more flexibility with that.
I think that's the perfect example. And yes, it was on an individual level, but I think it works the same when your trade-offs, you know, or with someone else and those decisions are being made together. But I think it's a perfect example because it shows like these are two things I value and want.
Yeah.
Here's the one that's more important to me. Here's
Mhm.
the one that I can like, you know, cut corners or like wait a little bit longer or whatever else, you know, and that example I
Mhm.
think can be mapped onto decisions with a significant other really easily. Like
Mm-hmm.
the same type of thing of like, here are the things that I'm willing to negotiate on. Here are the things that maybe
Mm-hmm.
there is some flexibility. Maybe we can find some other path. And here are the things that really I would like to go the way they need to go. And if that means I have to walk a separate path,
Mm-hmm.
sucks, but so be it.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it just made me think of something I created recently. I created a recording. I have my values and I'm trying to we go through these phases where, you feel business can be tough and it wears you down and you like have a few losses and then it just kind of like sucks and you carry that into the next day. So I created this like 2-minute recording of me kind of being really powerful. Like I'm powerful, I'm unstoppable, invincible, like to like ramp me up to get me excited. And then I also talk about like my whys of, I want a super successful six-figure successful 7-figure potentially businesses is what I'm out to create. And I actually say like my values, and part of the why is like so I can have the freedom to have a family and not work so much. Yeah, I do have to hustle right now to like get to that point, but I'm doing it for family. So it's almost like that desire to have and raise a family like drives my business and drives my business actions a little more, because my why of like, because I want to have a kid and raise a kid comfortably and have time for him or her, not doing like the traditional like 9-to-5 job. I want to have that freedom and flexibility for myself and my life, so I can say when I'm working and when I'm not, and spending time with my child. So that's kind of, I realize, it does kind of, it can interplay and can be a driver for one value pushing another value in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And again, if you going back a couple steps,
Mm-hmm.
it's very clear to me that if you put business up against family or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
the family one is going to win out, right? And that goes back to just kind of being able to like compare the two values and see which one, because the only reason this one is so strong, or at least from what you told me, is because it feeds this one. So like this is for sure the winner, or the more important value. I just thought that was a nice example, clear illustration of the value of kind of stack ranking different values.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up today? All right. Well, I thank you everyone for watching. We appreciate you watching. Be sure to subscribe and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.